Hello everyone, welcome to the 200 Literary and Jury Charge. Today we're going to start out with an excerpt from Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and this is on Smile at Strangers. Look into their eyes and say hello. Ready? Have you ever noticed or thought about how little eye contact most of us have with strangers? Why? Are we afraid of them? What keeps us from opening our hearts to people we don't know? I don't really know the answers to these questions, but I do know that there is virtually always a parallel between our attitude towards strangers and our overall level of happiness. In other words, it is unusual to find a person who walks around with her head down, frowning and looking away from people, who is secretly a peaceful, joyful person. I'm not suggesting it's better to be outgoing than introverted, that you need to expend tons of extra energy trying to brighten others' days, or that you should pretend to be friendly. I am suggesting, however, that if you think of strangers as being a little more like you and treat them not only with kindness and respect, but with smiles and eye contact as well, you'll probably notice some pretty nice changes in your life. You'll begin to see that most people are just like you. Most of them have families, people they love, troubles, concerns, likes, dislikes, fears, and so forth. You'll also notice how nice and grateful people can be when you're the first one to reach out. When you see how similar we all are, you begin to see the innocence in all of us. In other words, even though we often mess up, most of us are doing the best that we know how with the circumstances that surround us. Along with seeing the innocence in people comes a profound feeling of inner happiness. Okay. Got some jury charge. And the subject here is a plea for probation. Okay. Here we go. And I'm going to read this at 190. At this time, Your Honor, on behalf of the defendant, August J. Casey, I would like to make an application for probation for this defendant. As the court knows, it is customary, whenever a case comes before the court with the intent to get probation, to ask the court for a pre-sentence investigation. This was purposely not done in this case for this reason. When a man is a lawyer, his conduct has been above reproach, or he would not have been able to get his license from the state. It is a necessary prerequisite to becoming a lawyer that your conduct be impeccable. Now, Judge, it is also true that when you get a license from the state of Illinois, or when you receive a law degree from a university, it does not cloak you. You are just as human as if you were a butcher, baker, teacher, or anyone else in the ordinary walks of life. Would that it were otherwise when you get a law degree, and that you and I and the defendant here were given certain powers at that time to resist temptation, but that is not the case. This man, Judge, has been subjected to very cruel punishment in the form of serious illness. He has been sick for over a period of 10 or 12 years. He has not always been a bad man, as testified to here by his pastor, Father Wagner, who feels very highly about the man. I believe the whole city of Morton feels that he was a good man. Even in the complaining witnesses, they bear no malice toward this defendant. Now the purpose of any punishment to a defendant is twofold. One is to protect society and to gratify in some measure the people who have been injured. The other is for the rehabilitation of the defendant. I would like to ask this court how much further a man could go in an attempt to rehabilitate himself than the defendant in this case, August J. Casey. When he was sick and in the hospital, he sent for the priest. The priest told him to make himself clear with God, and it was with the purpose of making himself clear with God that he came into the state's attorney's office, told them about these cases, told them about other cases in which the statute of limitations had already run out, cooperated with them fully, took his files, his personal records, everything that they wanted, into the state attorney's office, signed statements, and answered every question. Now the court knows that maybe the state's attorney's office probably would have got him eventually in some of these cases, but Your Honor knows how difficult is an embezzlement cause before the court. This man could have fought for years, but he wanted to make peace with God, so he came in and confessed everything that was humanly possible to confess in connection with these cases, submitted himself to the court, and Your Honor is just waiting for your justice. I believe the man has been rehabilitated. He wants to make restitution to these people. I think he should be given a chance. He has suffered the greatest loss that a man can have. He has lost his license to practice law that he fought so hard to get. He has lost a means of making a living and a livelihood in a profession that he has practiced for 20 years. What greater depth can be asked of a man desiring to prostrate himself before the court? I think, Judge, if ever a man came before this court with the proper spirit of humility and ready to take his place in society, that man is August Casey, and that he should be placed on probation. I cannot say that I have ever felt as strongly for any other defendant that I have represented as I have for this man. I will now rest. Okay. I'm going to be reading more from The Evolution of Monstrosity, the Jerry Brudos fatal shoe fetish case. Okay, here we go. Ready? In the spring of 1968, the Brudoses moved to Salem into a house just a few blocks away from the Oregon State Hospital, where Jerry had been committed as a teenager. The house they rented had a large garage that stood separately across a narrow breezeway, and Jerry was overjoyed by the big space for his workshop. He installed a heavy padlock on the door and an intercom. He told his wife never to go into the garage without calling him on the intercom. The reason, he said, was that he had set up a photo darkroom, and if she opened the door, she might ruin the work he was doing and working on. Brudos bought a huge freezer and installed it in the garage. Susan complained that it was pointless to lock her away from the freezer when she needed to prepare dinners, but Brudos insisted she just tell him what she needed from the freezer, and he would bring it to her. This annoyed Susan, and sometimes she just wanted to look over all the things in the freezer for an idea of what to prepare for dinner. Susan noticed that Jerry was putting on more weight and getting heavier. One day she jokingly told him he was getting too fat. Jerry left the room without saying a word and then returned about 10 minutes later. Susan was shocked to see Jerry dressed in a bra with stuffing for breasts, a girdle with stockings, a huge high-heeled shoes. It was the strangest thing she had seen in her young life. Jerry asked her if he looked thinner now, and Susan laughed nervously, not knowing what to say. After an awkward silence, Jerry left and returned as himself again. They never talked about it afterward, and both behaved as if it had never happened. In November of 1968, Jerry Brudos again killed unexpectedly. He encountered Jan Whitney on the highway by chance on his way home from work. Her car had broken down and Brudos stopped. After inspecting the car, he said that he could fix it for her, but they would need to drive back to his house nearby for him to get his tools. Jan went along. When they got to the house, Jerry told Jan that his wife had not come home yet, and they would have to wait a few minutes for her to let him in so he could get his tools. Jan sat inside the car, which was parked in the driveway of Jerry's house. Brudos nonchalantly slipped into the back seat of the car behind Jan. In his statement to the police, Brudos said that he engaged Whitney in a little game, asking her if she could close her eyes and, without moving her hands, to describe how to tie a shoelace. Whitney went for the challenge, and as she sat there with her eyes closed, attempting to describe how to tie a shoe, Brudos slipped a strap around her throat and strangled her in the car. Afterward, he carried her body into his workshop and dressed her in some of the clothes from his collection and photographed her. he decided to keep the corpse. Brudos confessed to police that he kept Whitney's corpse in the garage for days. He would rush home from work and dress the body up in various shoes. He wanted something of her to keep, so he cut off one of her feet and experimented in preserving it. Brudos got rid of Jan Whitney's body only after the police nearly discovered it accidentally. Leaving the corpse in the garage, Brudos took Susan and the kids on a Thanksgiving weekend trip. While away, an automobile passing the Brudos' house skidded and crashed into the garage, knocking a hole through the wall. When the police arrived at the scene, they actually shone a light through the hole to inspect the damage, but did not see the dead woman in the garage. Not wanting to violate any constitutional rights by entering Jerry's property without his permission, the police left a card asking Jerry to call them when he got home. They needed to inspect the garage to determine damage for their report. When Jerry got home, he wrapped Jan's body in plastic and hid her in the water pump shed behind the garage. He then called the police and let them inspect the damage. Afterward, he threw Jan Whitney's body into a river, weighed down with a heavy automotive part. Neither Whitney's nor Slauson's bodies were ever recovered, and Brudos refused to tell the police exactly where he dumped them. In January of 1969, Jerry Brudos, celebrated his 30th birthday. Susan, in the meantime, began to witness her husband's behavior becoming progressively more bizarre. One day while hanging the laundry, she walked into the garage unannounced and saw photographs of nude women in Jerry's development trays. Susan probably did not recognize that they were actually dead. Jerry told her that he was developing pictures for a college kid and reminded her not to enter the garage without telling him. When Susan was away from the house, Jerry insisted that she call ahead before coming home. When asked why, he replied jokingly, so that he could get the blonde he had in the house out before she got home. Then Susan found pictures of Jerry that he took of himself using a camera timer. He was lying on their bed, dressed in different items of women's lingerie. His face was covered in the photographs, but she did recognize his huge body. One day she found a plastic object that looked like a very realistic copy of a female breast. She asked Brudos what it was, and he explained to her that he had an idea for a novelty item, a female breast paperweight. It was eerie how realistic it looked. Susan testified that Jerry told her it did not come out the way he wanted, and that later he made another one, slightly different. This one he put on the fireplace mantel in their living room, where police would later find it when they searched his home. At some point during this period, Brudos also acquired a handgun. So we'll stop there. It's amazing that he didn't get caught before then, you know. Okay, the subject here is admission of evidence. Ready? Here we go. Prosecutions for conspiracy present difficulties and temptations familiar to anyone with experience as a federal prosecutor. The difficulties derive from observance of the rules governing evidence admissible against some, but not all, defendants in a criminal case. The temptations derive from the advantages of prosecuting in one trial two or more persons collaborating in a criminal enterprise. One of the most recurring of the difficulties pertains to incriminating declarations by one or more of the defendants that are not admissible against others. The dilemma is usually resolved by admitting such evidence against the declarant, but cautioning the jury against its use in determining the guilt of the others. The fact of the matter is that too often such admonition against misuse is intrinsically ineffective, in that the effect of such a non-admissible declaration cannot be wiped from the brains of the jurors. The admonition, therefore, becomes a futile collocation of words and fails of its purpose as a legal protection to defendants against whom such a declaration should not tell. While enforcing the rule of admitting the declaration solely against a declarant and admonishing the jury not to consider it against other defendants, Judge Hand, in a series of cases, has recognized the psychological feat that this solution of the dilemma demands of juries. He thus stated the problem, quote, "In effect, however, the rule probably furthers rather than impedes the search for truth, and this perhaps excuses the device which satisfies form while it violates substance, that is, the recommendation to the jury of a mental gymnastic which is beyond not only their powers but anybody else's," end quote. It may well be that there is such a declaration only glancingly, as it were, affects a co-defendant who cannot be charged with the admitted declaration. The rule enforced by the court in this case does too little harm to leave its application to the discretion of the trial judge. But where the conspirator's statement is so damning to another against whom it is inadmissible, as is true in this case, the difficulty of introducing it against the declarant without inevitable harm to a co-conspirator, the petitioner in this case, is no justification for causing such harm. The government should not have the windfall of having the jury be influenced by evidence against a defendant which, as a matter of law, they should not consider, but which they cannot put out of their minds. After all, the prosecution could use the confession against the confessor and at the same time avoid such weighty unfairness against a defendant who cannot be charged with the declaration by not trying all the co-conspirators in a single trial. It is no answer to suggest that here the petitioner defendant's guilt is amply demonstrated by the uninfected testimony against him. That is the best of reasons for trying him, freed from the inevitable unfairness of being affected by testimony not admissible against him. In any event, it is not for an appellate tribunal to know how the jury's mind would have operated if powerfully improper evidence had not, in effect, been put in the scale against the petitioner. Okay. I have an article here. Well, it's actually a mini mystery. You can't bank on murder. Ready? I'm behind on my paperwork. I'll have to stay late at the bank tonight. Allie sighed deeply and assumed an injured pout, an expression that had become all too familiar in her short marriage to Ben Hinton. To think that she had considered this man a prime catch just 2 years ago. True, Allie had not exactly been swept off her feet by the stodgy man who was 20 years her senior, but she had been utterly captivated by the idea of marriage to the president of the largest bank in the county. But life with Ben was beyond dole rescue. His real marriage was to his beloved bank and the mounds of paperwork that required his constant personal attention. Slightly once more, Allie raised a half-hearted objection. Ben, I just wish you would learn to delegate some of the work to the younger people on your staff. I keep trying to tell you that you're far too important to be burning the midnight oil down there the way you do. Well, you're probably right, he said, but remember, I'm an old dog who doesn't know any differently. Secretly, however, Allie was delighted with Ben's plans to work. She would have an opportunity to spend a couple of hours with Tom. Tom Ballard, the head teller, had caught Allie's eye on her very first visit to the bank. He was strikingly handsome, with his dark, curly hair, inquisitive blue eyes, and irresistible smile. He appeared to be everything she would have wanted in a man, if romance and desire had been Allie's primary concerns. From his shy appraisal of her when they were introduced by Ben, she judged that he found her attractive as well. She was not mistaken. Allie recalled her rendezvous with Tom just the week before at a roadhouse over the county line. Realizing they could never find true happiness together as long as Ben was in the way, Allie had attempted to plant a seed in Tom's mind. Tom, my main problem with Ben and the staff is that He never gives you or the others at the bank any real opportunity to take on added responsibilities. It's unfair. How does he ever expect any of you to better yourselves? That's true, no question. He just wants to take it all on himself. But let's face it, this way, it does give you and me a chance to see each other. Yes, a few stolen hours here and there, Allie replied angrily. Tom, we were meant to be together. Why does it have to be like this? Besides, he's so unbearably old-fashioned. The bank could really use some new ideas. Take, for example, that horrible, crowded, old vault with the door propped open by a chair. It could slip and someone could be locked in there. As a matter of fact, that did happen the other day to Lori, one of the other tellers. Luckily, Jim, the security man, just happened to see the door closing and hollered for her. We managed to get it open right away. Thank goodness. Tom, that's terrible. You realize she might have suffocated. I was plenty concerned about the incident and told your husband that we needed to look into a newer and larger vault. He wasn't persuaded, though. Old conservative Ben preserving the bank's assets. It worries me, Tom. He goes into that vault when he's alone there. What if someone caused that vault door to close on him? Don't even think about it, Tom replied. But she did. At 8 o'clock that same evening, Allie was parked just across the street from the bank. Lights shone behind opaque windows, but the one light she was waiting for was not visible. She knew that a shining bare bulb toward the rear of the building and off to the right would alert her that Ben had entered the vault for a final inventory before closing it. If she moved quickly, the rest would be easy. Poor Ben would be found in the morning following her worried call to the police to report that he had worked late and had not returned home. He would be seen as a victim of his own stubborn resistance to modernization. She fingered the key that Ben had furnished with her when she first protested his frequent late evenings at the bank. She could always use it to enter the employee's side door, he explained. Maybe she might be in the mood to surprise him there one evening if she was lonely. Well, she was going to surprise him all right. One nagging thought restrained her for a moment. What if Tom remembered their conversation? But he wouldn't dare mention it, and anyway, her daring scheme would only prove how immense her love was for him. It was far easier than she had imagined. When the vault light was suddenly flickering on shortly after 9, she quickly entered the bank from the side entrance. Good, the light was still on. He was in the vault. A hard push with gloved hands, and the door clanged shut. She was a bit horrified at the pounding and the muffled screams that soon followed. She must keep her head. After all, she didn't know the combination and couldn't have opened the vault if she wanted to. Poor Ben was fast using up whatever little oxygen was available. It would soon be over. Allie was able to stay remarkably calm on the drive home. Then her serenity was shattered when she noted lights burning in the house. How could this be? She hadn't left the lights on. She was certain. There was Ben's car parked in the drive. What was going on? She received a real shock when Ben greeted her at the front door. He grinned broadly as he said, "Hi, honey. How was the movie?" "Ben, I don't understand," Allie stammered as she tried to regain her composure. "Well, honey, I got sidetracked a bit with a problem Tim Ballard was having with the cash count after work. No big deal, really, but you know how I can get into things." "Yes, but Ben, you mean Tom Ballard was there at the bank with you?" "Oh, for a while we were both there. But I got to thinking about what you said this morning and left Tom to work things out." "Ben, you're telling me that you left Tom alone at the bank with the vault open?" A bit surprised both at her agitation and her correct assumption that the vault had been open, he replied, "Why, yes, but Tom's completely trustworthy." He thought for a moment and laughed. "Besides, I had a new camera security system installed in the bank last month when he was on vacation. He's been after me about modernizing, and would you believe it? He hasn't even spotted the cameras yet. I didn't shut them off after work tonight. If anything unusual happens, it will be on a recording in the morning." He paused before asking in a concerned manner, "Honey, what's wrong? You're pale as a ghost. Let me get you a glass of water, my sweet." Okay, and that concludes our literary and jury charge for the 200 class. Have a great day.